Okay, right. And I just want to make sure, switch off the volume there. That's it. Right, done. Okay, I can go back to Zoom. Where are we? Got it. Right, we're live streaming.
But you're still not very clear, Yedidah.
I'm not clear. Oh dear.
Oh, yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. I mean, Zoom, you've got to have it. I've got to, really have it close, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah, that was the problem last week.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. It was okay. It got sorted out. It was fine.
All right. Yes. Just so long as you tell me, then it should be okay. Right. So we're recording and we're on YouTube. We're ready to go. Let's go. All right then. So I've got to share my screen. 1 second. Share the screen. There we go. Right. So we're going to start off with our prayer, and then we'll go on from there. ריבון עולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב רחמן וסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, בקידה בהשתחוויה שקרבתנו לתורתך ולעבודתך עבודת הקודש. ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו ומה חיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה. על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחול ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, ועל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לבינך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן את לבבינו לראותך ולבבך, ותקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ויהיה לימודנו זה נחת רוח לפני כיסא כבודך כרך ניחוח, ותציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבודך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גלית דבריך אלה בעולם, וזכותם וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמימותם וקדושתם, יעמוד לנו לבל נקשר בדברים אלו, ובזכותם תראיננו במה שאנו לומדים, כמאמר נעים זמירות ישראל, גל עיני והביטה נפלאות מתורתך, כי אדוני תן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו רצונים מפי, ויגון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Amen. Can you rtzon?
Amen.
Okay, great. So what we're looking at today is HaChodesh Hazeh Yeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. So if we just go for a moment into the Torah itself, actually I put that on a Word file yesterday, so let's see if I can find it in my Word file. 1 second, it should be there. There we are. It's here. Okay, so let me just share that. Share the screen. There. Right. ויאמר Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. And God said to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt. Okay, so they're still in the land of Egypt. All right, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This month it should be for you the beginning of all months. Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana. It is the first for you of the different months of the year. And then it goes straight on to discuss all the rules of Pesach. Okay, first it talks about what the children of Israel need to do in Egypt. Okay, that moment, that year. All right, and then it goes on to talk about the months, the Pesach Ladorot, Pesach for all generations. So my question really was, what is the connection between HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim and the coming out of Egypt? And that was sort of like at the back of my mind when I was thinking about this shiur. That's my question, all right? Okay. Now, this is the actual parasha that we'll be reading in shul on Shabbos, okay, this Parashat Akhodesh, because it's got all the rules of Pesach in it, and that's why they read it on this Rosh Chodesh. First of all, because it's HaChodesh Hazeh, and also to remind everybody, Pesach's coming. You've got to get going, okay? Because it's got both the aspects of clearing chametz out of the houses, and it's also got the actual positive things that we need to do for Pesach. So we'll just have a quick look and see what it's actually saying. We can't take a quick look, we'll take a look. Dabru el kol, and we'll talk about it as we go along. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor, b'asor lachodesh hazeh, v'ikru lehem ish seh lebeit avot seh lebayit. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of the month, they should take for themselves each man a lamb for their father's house. Each one has one lamb for the household. In the Zohar, we learn what the significance of this lamb is. Sorry?
No, I have a question.
Yeah.
Were they known as Israel already in Egypt? They weren't known as Israel in Egypt.
I think they were.
No, okay.
They weren't. No, I didn't. 1 second. That's a very
okay. All right. I'm sorry to stop your train of thought.
Wait a minute. Let me just have a quick look. When the children of Israel came down to Egypt, it starts in Shemot. Elu Shemot b'nei Yisrael kshaldu Mitzrayim. No. I mean, the very first verse in Shemot, isn't that? Let me just have a look. Here we go. Elu Shemot b'nei Yisrael haba'im Mitzrayim. Yes, they were known as Israel.
No, okay.
Yeah. But it's a very good question. Yes, they were. I mean, your question's a good question, because were they actually Israel in Egypt? And I think the answer to that question is so long as they were connected with Yosef, who was the tzaddik, okay, who brought, the Torah of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then came through Yosef. And so long as he was alive and they were connected with him, then they really were Bnei Yisrael, and they were separated from the Egyptians, and they weren't enslaved to the Egyptians at that point. They became enslaved, according to Rabbi Ashlag, they became enslaved because they lost their connection with the tzaddik. Okay? And so they began to lower, because they no longer remembered him properly. They no longer remembered clearly the tzaddik and what the tzaddik was. So they began to connect with the Egyptians around them. And that was the real slavery. There was the physical slavery, of course, but the real slavery was they became mentally and emotionally enslaved to the culture, if you like, of the Egyptians. That was the real slavery. Okay, and that's what they couldn't get out of. And they began to sink to their level. And in fact, the sages tell us that they sank down 49 levels of uncleanness. They were so wrapped up in the culture of the Egyptians, they intermingled with them, that they were almost indistinguishable from them. Apparently, if they'd gone one more down, it would not have been possible to get them out. Okay? So your question is a good question, because you're really asking to what extent were they Yisrael when they were in Egypt? Okay? And I think the answer is that, first of all, they didn't ultimately completely intermingle, so they were still distinct. And the other thing the Zohar says is that the Egyptians despised the Bnei Yisrael. They despised them. They for them to eat together, for example, was an abomination. We know that from the story of Joseph, that the Hebrews had to eat separately. So the Zohar also says that one was the reason why the children of Israel were sent down to exile into Egypt, because exile was a necessity for them to develop the desire for God, okay? Because there's no redemption without exile first. Okay, there's no light unless there's a vessel. So they needed a vessel for the light of God. And because the Egyptians actually despised them, ultimately the Egyptians weren't prepared to mix fully with them. Otherwise, they would have, been lost. Okay, so yeah, they fully became Israel, like you say, when they connected with their faith, which is what actually happened on the night of Seder night. Because what they actually did was, it says, they should take for themselves a lamb. Okay, what was the lamb? It was an idol. It was an idol which the Egyptians worshipped. It was one of the idols of the Egyptians. And I think it was one of the idols that they'd been worshipping. And they had to actually let go of their will to receive for themselves alone, let go of this idol, not only let go of it, but slaughter it and put its blood on the doorposts. Okay? So this was the first instructions that they're given. Okay? And if the household is too small to eat one lamb, then you do it together with your neighbor. Okay? Tamim Zachar ben Shana, it gives you all the details of what the sacrifice needs to be. A lamb without blemish, a male, year old. I'm sure all these details have meaning. I'm sure they have meaning. I just don't know the meanings, okay? But I'm sure they have meanings. So they had to get this lamb and tie it, and it says, according to the Midrash, they tied it to the foot of the bed, and they had to keep it from the 10th till the 14th, okay? And there's lots of discussion about why did they have to keep it from the 10th to the 14th? Why not slaughter it straight away? Why do you have to catch it on the 10th? Why not on the 14th? And the answer is, it's because both they and the Egyptians had to know that they were going to slaughter the lamb. All right? ולקחו מן הדם ונתנו על שתי המזוזות ועל המשקוף על הפתים אשר אכלו אותו בהם. And they were told to take from the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel on the houses which they were going to eat inside. Okay? And the Zohar teaches us that they actually made the sign of God's name on the on the doorposts. Okay, you put it on one side, and on the other side, and across the top, you get the letter Hey. There's another version in the Zohar which says you get two yuds. Either way, okay, one yud on one side, one yud on the other side. Either way, you've got God's name actually on the house. Okay, so this is a very, very powerful statement that the children of Israel are making. It's not a, on a simplistic way, we could say it's kind of like some sort of sign for the angel, they know, or God to know to pass over a house. But that's, God knows who's inside whose house. You don't need a sign on the outside, to tell him so. What it actually is, it's something different. It's the Zohar teaches us that an action from below awakens the appropriate action from above. So the actions that we do below actually have meaning. They have real meaning. And so by taking the lamb, okay, they're taking what had been their idol, okay, slaughtering it, and putting the blood on the doorposts of the house, doorposts and on the lintel. They're making God's name, okay. They're making a very powerful statement indeed, okay. What they're saying is that their statement is, I have let go of my will to receive. I've let go of what I was worshipping. I'm putting my faith in God. And by doing that, they are aligning themselves. They're coming into affinity of form with God. And that's the reason why the angel passed over their house, okay, and didn't slaughter them, because this great light of redemption, which was coming into the world on the night of the 15th, 14th in the evening is the night of the 15th, okay, which was coming into the world, this light of redemption was so great, okay, that if they had not done that, they also would have died like the Egyptians, the firstborn of the Egyptians, okay? So what they're doing is actually aligning themselves with God, being in affinity of form, okay? ואכלו את הבשר בלילה הזה, אצלי אש ומצות על מרורים יאכלוהו. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, the meat in that night, roasted with fire, matzot, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Now every single word here has got loads and loads of meaning, all right? So we'll just talk a little bit about what I've understood so far, all right? And I'm only just beginning, okay? All right. So they have to eat it on that night. Tzli esh, roasted with fire. The Zohar teaches us that this was again to destroy the idol with fire. Okay, there's somewhere. Oh, I've forgotten where it came from. I've forgotten. Sorry. I did look it up, but I've forgotten. There's something psilei esh, or psilei Elohim, to destroy the idols of other gods with fire. Okay, so that was the reason why it had to be roasted, not boiled, okay, but roasted, because it was part of the destruction of the idol. Now, the issue of the Mutsot is really fascinating, okay, because Mutsot, they were, we're going to see in a minute, they were told about Mutsot and not having chometz already from the beginning of the month. So this issue that they ate matzot because they were driven out of Egypt, and they couldn't tarry, etc. There's sort of conflicting evidence here. All right, let's go on and have a look at this, and also the bitter herbs. We'll come back to the bitter herbs in a minute. Al tochlu mimenu na, don't eat it raw, bashal mevushal b'mayim, or well boiled with water. Kim tzli esh. Right, again, this was part of the destruction of the idol, that it was roasted with fire. Arosho avel kubo. And the Zohar says, where it's said its head on its legs and on its insides. I don't quite know what this means, but the Zohar tells us this. It was a way to show bizayon, the way to show despising it, okay? Lo tatu mimenu ad boke, you're not allowed to leave any of it over till the morning. Or tami mimenu ad boke ba'esh tisufo, again, what's left over to be burnt. V'kacha tuchluto, and thus shall you eat it. Motnechem chagurim, your loins girded. Nalechem baraglechem, your shoes on your feet. Maklechem b'yedechem, your staff in your hand. Okay? Because they have with total faith in redemption. Total faith in redemption. V'achaltem oto b'chipazon, and you shall eat of it in haste. Pesachu l'Hashem. It is a Pesach for God. This is really, really, really amazing, isn't it? Like really demonstrating faith. Okay? There they were, slave mentality. And they are now ready to go. Okay, so they're going to have absolutely ready to go. Now, if you're told this, and again, there's lots of questions come up. If they were told this, right, here we go, on the first of the month, I hope this month shall be to you the beginning of the month, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, okay? They're told what to do on the 10th day, all right? They've got they've got the instructions, okay, from the first day of the month, all right? They weren't told 5 minutes before, and you shall eat it in haste. Pesach hu Hashem, it is a Pesach to God. So again, what does this word chipazon actually mean? It can't mean, and it doesn't mean, that they didn't have any warning. It's like, oh, right, we've got to go, right, you know, it wasn't that exactly. What it means is like this. They had sunk to the 49th level of uncleanness, all right? So they didn't actually have vessels with which they could use in order to receive the great light of redemption. All right? God just said, okay, that's it, we're going. All right? And he didn't wait for them to correct their vessels for the sake of giving in order for them to get out of Egypt. All right? So this is the idea of delay galakates. He jumped to the end. All right? And this is called itaruta de le'ela. It means that God lifted us out without waiting for us to have the right vessels ready. Okay? We just had to go in faith, but all our vessels of receiving were, in fact, still contaminated from the contact with the Egyptians and the servitude to the Egyptians. We'd been enslaved mentally, emotionally, spiritually to the Egyptians. Okay? And this hadn't yet been really dealt with. Okay? So God said, okay, right. Chipazon means in haste from the spiritual perspective. You can see that physically they had 2 weeks to prepare. All right? But from the spiritual perspective, their vessels were not primed yet to get out of Egypt from the place of actual giving. They were still in their place of, they weren't corrected. Those vessels weren't corrected yet. Okay. ועברתי בארץ מצרים בלילה הזה, and I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. והכיתי כל בכור בארץ מצרים, מאדם ועד בהמה. And I will smite the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from man till beast. Okay? Now, smiting the firstborn of the land of Egypt, there's the same action, apparently, which was the slaughtering of the land, the Korban Pesach, okay, which kept the children of Israel safe, actually caused the firstborn to die. Now, it's written like that in the Zohar, and there is an explanation, but I didn't really understand it, to be honest. I know that the Bechor Mitzrayim, Bechor, refers to the biggest light, the biggest vessels for the lights. And I didn't understand whether it meant that the lights were so great, okay, that they just, weren't able to receive them properly, and so they died. And that's very likely that the Bechor of Eretz Mitzrayim is like the huge wills to receive for themselves alone, okay? And when the big light comes, they just shattered, they just received them for themselves alone, and that way they died. All right? But there is another explanation, which, like I say, is sort of connected with the Korban Pesach and painting the blood on the doorposts, but I have to say I didn't understand that. All right? And against all the gods of the Egyptians I will do judgment. Now, what's the gods of the Egyptians? It's, like they're ministering angels. That's what it says. Okay? I think, in a way, this was like the first thing that had to happen. And the Korban Pesach is part of that. the offering up of the Pesach sacrifice was in fact part of the judgment, okay, against the gods of the Egyptians, all right, because that was one of their gods, okay. Also, we saw that they'd, the plagues, the Nile, for example, was also a god for them, all right. So a lot of judgments has already happened against them. But what it really means, I think, is the ministering angels, the corresponding spiritual aspects of the Egyptians were also having judgments against them. Now, I like to do the way Rabbi Ashlag recommends, which is to actually look at this story and see the elements within ourselves. Okay, so within ourselves, we've got the Egyptians, which is our will to receive for ourselves alone. Yeah. And I've also got, obviously the thoughts, which are feeding those desires of my will to receive for myself alone. So the gods of the Egyptians, the thoughts which are feeding those or controlling those desires of my will to receive for myself alone, those are the Elohim. These are these false gods, okay, which I'm glad God will do judgment against. I don't want them anymore. I want to get rid of them, okay? So here's our opportunity that on the Seder night, okay, God is going to help us get free of those negative thoughts and negative ideas which are feeding our wills to receive for ourselves alone. Ani Hashem, I am God. And notice that he uses here the word Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, the name Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, which is very interesting because judgment is usually associated with the word Elohim, okay? All right? And Yud-Heh Vav-Heh is associated with the word, with compassion. And we need to understand that what is judgment against the Egyptian, which is our will to receive for ourselves alone against us, is compassion for the soul, is compassion for Israel. Okay? Because these two elements within ourselves are absolute opposites. All right? So, Uv'chol Elohei Mitzrayim eseh shvatim, and against the gods of the Egyptians, which are within ourselves, I will do judgments. Ani Hashem, I am the Lord, I am compassionate. For my compassion, I will do judgment against the gods of the Egyptians. Okay. Vayadam lachem laot, and this blood will be for you for a sign. It's not a sign for God. God knows perfectly well who's in whose house. Okay, he doesn't need any signs. But we need to make that sign. All right? Okay? That we are doing the work below in order to awaken the redemption above. Okay? Alabatim ashetem sham, va'iti et adam, and I will see the blood, v'pasachti aleichem, and I will jump over you. Okay? So, Rabbi Baruch Shalom Ashlag describes this idea of jumping over, all right, in one of his articles. And he says that jumping over is like you go from Israel house to or Egyptian house to Egyptian house, and you save the Israelite in between, okay? Or you can do it the other way, Israel house to Israel house, and the Egyptian in between, okay? And he says that actually what this sort of jumping over means is that our good deeds all add up, and the negative stuff where we fall down is jumped over. Okay, no, the other way around. The negative stuff is not counted in. All right. So God actually joins up together all the Israelite houses which are saved, okay, and the Egyptian houses which were in between are not are destroyed in a way, okay. So what this means is that our good deeds all add up together and are not lost. I don't think I explained that very well, but never mind. Maybe you understood anyhow. Okay. And there won't be no plague upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And again, the land meaning the consciousness of the Egyptians. And of course, I mean, it was also true, probably physically, historically, whatever you want to say, but the real way to relate to it for ourselves is in the consciousness of ourselves in the present. And this day shall be for you also for a memorial. And you shall celebrate it Chag Lashem. Now the word Chag is an interesting word, okay? The word Chag actually comes from the word Chugah, meaning a circle. You go to a chug of something or the other, yoga or something. It means a circle. It means people sitting around in a circle. Okay? So it's meaning here, all right, the cycle of the year. All right, that the cycle comes round again. The same energy that appeared on the night of Leil Seder, when we actually came physically out of Egypt, is the same energy that comes round. Hagotem oto Chag Lashem is that same circular energy that comes round again every year. L'dorotechem, throughout your generations, chukat olam tachaguhu. It is an everlasting statute that you shall celebrate. Tachugu again, like coming round again. Shivat yamim matzot tochelu. For 7 days you shall eat matzot. Now, there's an absolutely fascinating idea about what these matzot are, okay? All right? I spent some time this year really trying to understand matzot, because, like I say, there's definitely a contradiction between the fact that they knew about matzot, and they were given the rules of matzot before they left Egypt, and the evidence that they rushed out of Egypt and the dough didn't have time to rise. So we're going to have a look at that in a minute. Bayom Rishon, on the first day, Tashbitu Sa'omi Batechem, cease the leaven from your houses. Kikol ochel chametz v'nechota nefesh ahim Yisrael miyom arishon ad yom hashvi'i. So for anybody who eats leaven, that soul will be cut off from Israel from the first day to the 7th day. So chametz is taught in the Zohar as being the Yetzer Hara, okay? And we can understand that. The Yetzer Hara, the will to receive for itself alone, has a characteristic that it tends to expand, like dough. When it's got good yeast in it, it rises, okay? So it's the same thing with chametz. The will to receive for itself alone gets one portion, and then it wants 200, and then it wants 400, and it just grows exponentially. All right. So chametz is actually the symbol of the Yetzer Hara. Now, why do we have to stop the Yetzer Hara for 7 days? What's all this about? And this is connected with what matzah is as well. And the issue is that, like I say, they didn't have kelim from Kedusha. They didn't have vessels of receiving which were in holiness at this point. Now, there's one other thing that I haven't mentioned, okay, which was, I wonder if it's here, what is it? They were also told that a uncircumcised person can't eat from it. And I can't find, for example, a moment where it is. Well, never mind. We know that an uncircumcised person is not allowed to eat from it. I must be here somewhere. I just can't see it for the moment. Okay. All right. So they actually also did Brit Milah on that night. Okay. And the blood that they put on the doorposts of the houses was both from the blood of Brit Milah and from the blood of the Korban Pesach. Now, what was Brit Milah about? Why did they need to do Brit Milah dafka on that night? Okay, and what they actually did was they wanted, or they were commanded to just remove the foreskin, the orla, what's called the orla, which is the will to receive for itself alone. Okay, so here we are. They've sunk down to the 49th level of Tum'ah, so they're actually removing that will to receive for themselves alone. Okay, so now they've just come into holiness, but they've only just begun. All right, so the aspect of holiness that they can actually do is faith. They can just do giving. They can't receive for the sake of giving. Okay, they can only just do faith, only just do giving, and we've got to start building the vessels. Okay, so from Pesach to Shavuot, in order so that we can actually be able to receive for the sake of giving by the time we get to Shavuot, because that's when we've actually really got to be able to receive the light of Torah, okay, with vessels of receiving, which are rectified, okay, for the sake of giving. So at this point on Leila Seder, all they've done, but it's very huge what they've done, is to actually do Brit Milah, to remove the will to receive for itself alone. And apparently there's two parts of Brit Milah. One is called Milah and one is called Pri'ah. And Milah is the first part, which is remove the negative, but they hadn't managed to come to the positive, okay? The real vessels of being able to receive for the sake of giving, that they weren't able to do till they got to Shavuot. And that's the reason why on the very next day, we start counting the Omer, because we have to start building those vessels. We're commanded to build those vessels now. We've after Pesach, after Leila Seder, we've let go of our will to receive for ourselves alone. God has delivered us from the servitude of the Egyptians. We've done our bit with Brit Milah, the Korban Pesach, okay? And therefore cleaned away the chometz, okay? And therefore, straight after Pesach, the first day of Pesach, we need to start now building the vessels to enable them building the Malchut, so that it's able to have a full vessels ready with which to receive the Torah on Shavuot. Okay, so the issue of matzah, it's called lechem oni, the bread of. Now it's usually called in English. It's usually translated as the bread of affliction, but I don't think that's a very good translation. The real translation is lechem oni, meaning oni, a poor man. Okay, the bread of the poor. What is a poor? One who's poor in knowledge of Torah. Okay, in receiving the light of Torah. And they couldn't receive the light of Torah at that level, okay, because they didn't have vessels which were rectified for the sake of giving, okay? And that's why it's Mutsot, okay, which we need to eat, because it's lechem oni, okay? And what does this mean? It means that we don't want to use our wills to receive, which are symbolized by the chametz. We want only to use what we can manage in faith, which is lechem oni, okay, this vessels of, these small vessels of giving. We're only in the beginning of giving, and that's what we want to do. And that's why we commanded to eat the Mutsot with this lechem oni for the 7 days of Pesach. Okay. I didn't think of this before, but I suppose the 7 days, the first 7 days of Pesach, by the time you get to the end of the seventh day, you've probably got, the first week of the Omer, done, more or less, haven't you? I mean, you start with Chesed, Sheba Chesed on the second day, all right? So you've got, you're beginning with Kalim, by the time you're coming to eat some Chometz again after Pesach, you're okay. You've got a few. You've got some vessels of kedusha to balance things. Okay. Where were we? Vayikra Moshe l'kol ziknei Israel v'yom aleihem, and Moses called to all the elders of Israel, and he said to them, Mishchu kuchu lechem tzon mishpachotechem v'shachatu Pesach. And he said, draw out and take for yourselves a sheep for your families and slaughter the Pesach, the Korban Pesach. Ulekachtem agudat Ezov. Now, why Ezov? Ezov, hyssop. I think it's also, what we call nowadays zatar. It grows on the hillsides around here. You take it also around Jerusalem. You get some really good zatar around there. So you take the zatar, okay? And why zatar? Because it was used for purification. And again, we want to get rid of all the idols. We want to get rid of all that wills to receive for ourselves alone. We want to purify. Utavaltim badam asher basaf, and you shall dip it in the blood which is in the basin. Vigatim el mashkof ve'el shtei mezuzot, and you shall reach to the lintel and to the two side posts. Okay, and that way the Zohar says there's two different Zohars. One says they made the letter Hey of God's name. The other one says they made two Yuds. Either way, it works. They had God's name there. Okay, min adam asher basaf, from the blood which is in the basin. Vatem lo tetzu ish mi petach beito ad boker, and you don't go out of the doorway of the house until morning. All right, because nobody is completely a tzaddik. Nobody's a tzaddik. We've all make mistakes. All right, and you can't rely on like, oh, well, God's only going to hit the Egyptians. He's not going to hit me, kind of thing. That's kind of like, when the Zohar says when there's danger around, you have to take care. You have to stay inside. All right? You can't rely on your good deeds to protect you. Why not? Because all of us have negative stuff. Nobody's without the negative. We all have to take care. Okay, so this was the rule. Even though you might have done the Korban Pesach, even though you've put the name of God on your doorpost, you've still got to take care. You've still got to be humble, okay, and stay in till the morning. ועבר השם לנגוף את מצרים וראה את הדם על המשקוף על שתי מזוזות ופסח השם על הפתח ולא ייתן המשחית לבוא אל בתיכם לנגוף. And so God will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood, okay, and again, he doesn't really need a sign, but what happens is a ma'aseh lamata mo'eh ma'aseh lamala, that the action below awakens the equivalent above. Okay, and so when he sees the blood on the lintel or on the two doorposts, he'll pass over the doorway and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. And you shall keep this matter as a statute for you and your children forever. And it will be when you come to the land which God will give you. What's the land? The land is the consciousness. It's also the land of Israel, obviously, but it's the consciousness, okay, of the consciousness of the will to give, All right? That's what God will give us as a consequence of the redemption from Egypt. That God will give us the consciousness that we will be able to serve him. Okay? Kasher diber, he's spoken. Ushmatim et avodah zot, and you shall keep this service. Vayak yomru aleichem b'nechem, and it will be when your children ask you, ma avodah zot lachem, what is this service for you? Okay? V'amartim zevach pesach hu l'Hashem, and you shall say, this is the Pesach sacrifice to God. Asher pasach abatei b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, which he passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt. B'nogpo Mitzrayim, when he smote the Egyptians. V'tbatenu hitzil, and he saved our houses. Okay? V'yikot ha'am yishtachavu, and the people bowed their head and they worshipped. Okay? All right. Ve'echu v'yasu b'nei Israel, and they went, and the children of Israel did, kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe v'Aaron kenasu, and they did what God had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That's powerful, okay? They listened. Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, and it came to pass in the middle of the night. Now there's an inner meaning in the Zohar, and what the middle of the night means, okay? It's a complicated idea, or at least I found it complicated. I learnt it, but to say I understood it, I'm not sure I did. Basically what it means is that we never, the way of Judaism is never to take the light, all the light, all right? Always only to take what's needed and no more, all right? Always, never, it's not extreme, never to take everything, because the light is so great that we need to, first of all, wrap it in the light of loving kindness, and then what we receive is much less. And that's chatzi halayla, all right? Because the light is present in the night. What's Laila? The light is present, okay? But it's not wrapped with the light of loving kindness. And that gives it darkness instead of day, okay? It's not that there's no light. There is light, but it's not wrapped with kindness and compassion, and therefore it's dark instead of light, okay? So the answer is again, not to take everything, only just to receive what's necessary for what we can receive for the sake of giving, and that's it. והשם היכה כל בכור בארץ מצרים מבכור פרעה יושב על כיסאו עד בכור שביעי אשר בבית הבור וכל בכור בהמה. And so God smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. Vayakom Paro Laila, and Pharaoh rose up in the night, who v'kol avadav, he and all his servants, v'kol Mitzrayim, and all Egypt, v'yitzaka gdola b'Mitzrayim, and there was a great cry in the land of Egypt, ki ein bata she'ein sham meit, for there was no house where there was nobody dead. Okay? And then, let's keep going. V'yikra Moshe u'Aaron laila, and he called for Moses and Aaron by night. And he said, get up and leave, get out from among my people, Gamatem, Gam b'nei Israel, you and the children of Israel, and go and serve God as you have spoken. The Zohar says, when it says Vayikra, and it doesn't say who, okay? Right, here it says Vayakom Pharaoh, that Pharaoh got up. But when it says Vayikra, it just says he called. It doesn't say who called, okay? Then it says it's actually the ministering angel of the Egyptians, all right, called to Moses and Aaron. Gam tzonechem, your flock and your herds, take as you have spoken and go. Ubeirachtem gam oti, and bless me also. It's very powerful. Okay. And the Egyptians were urgent on the people to hurry, send them away from the land, because otherwise all of us are dead. And there we get it. And the people lifted up their dough, before it was leavened. Now, they lifted up their dough, all right, before it was leavened. They took what they were dealing with, all right, okay, and they didn't let it leaven. They didn't let their faith turn into the will to receive again, okay? That's what it really means, okay? They didn't start looking to how can I receive. And it's a difficult thing when you've just been receiving, and you've cut it off. You've done Brit Milah, you've done Korban Pesach, you've done all these actions, okay? And instead of saying a sigh of relief and saying, done it now, and I can go back to my old ways, all right? Which is actually a very human thing to do. They didn't do that. They picked up their batsake, what you're dealing with, your consciousness. And they didn't allow it to lachmitz again. They didn't allow their wills to receive, to overtake them. All right? They didn't do it. They didn't do that. Their kneading doughs being bound up in their clothes, al shichmam, on their shoulders. Okay, they're not allowing it to leaven. I've got a question about this, which I think is very interesting. I mean, if you take dough, okay, and you don't do anything with it, it's going to rise all on its own. At least mine does. Yeah. Maybe if you don't put any yeast in it, but I would have thought it does. So it says
it does rise, which is why we have this sort of like 18-minute matzahs.
That's right. So it says they had to put their kneading doughs wrapped up in their clothes on their shoulders. They had to actually keep working at it to make sure it didn't rise whilst they were going. Do you see what I'm saying? Because if they had just allowed their dough, just made the dough and just left it and said, okay, we're going, right, and then it would have risen on its own. If we think about that, what does it mean? It means that not going back, falling back into your wills to receive yourself alone takes a lot of energy. All right? You've got to keep at it. You've got to keep working with it. I read that. I think it was in the Ramchal yesterday, and I didn't understand at the time what I was reading. But that's the point, isn't it? They've got to keep working at it. All right? Because otherwise it will rise. If you keep punching it down, all right, and dealing with it, it won't rise. All right? But if you just leave it alone, it'll rise. So,
but if it's bound up, then it can't rise. If it's like in a small container, then it can't rise bigger than, they say it's bound up in their clothes.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I think that they took care to make sure it wouldn't rise, whatever way they did it.
Right, yes.
All right, so this is really interesting. They didn't just let it, because if you leave it alone, it'll rise. That's the point. You've got to do something active to stop it rising. Okay, either you bake it, or you keep working at it so it doesn't rise. It won't rise if you keep pounding it down. But the other thing, you're right. Or maybe they just wrapped it up very securely so it couldn't rise. Okay, but they had to do something. They couldn't. So this is a totally different picture, that you get. That, oh, well, they were so busy, running out of Egypt that they didn't. It was actually opposite. They had to really deal with their dough to make sure it wouldn't turn into chametz, one way or another. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they asked of the Egyptians vessels of silver and vessels of gold and raiment. Now, what is this about? This is about the promise that where was the exile of Egypt first brought up? It was in Brit Bein Abtarim with Abraham. And God said, that you should know that your children will be exiled in a land which is not theirs. And they will serve them and they will afflict them for 400 years. And after that they'll come up with Bilchush Gadol. And these words of vessels of silver and vessels of gold and raiment, these are words not of silver, gold, and raiment may be, but they are also words which talk about vessels of the right-hand line, which is kesef, vessels of the left-hand line, and garments. So they weren't able to use their own vessels yet, but they were able to take from the Egyptians vessels of the right-hand line, the left-hand line, and garments, which is the vessels of receiving, which eventually, like at Shavuot, they would be able to use for the sake of giving. Vashem natan et chenaam, and God gave them the favor in the sight of the people. Beinei Mitzrayim. Maybe these were the ones that they had to bring into holiness. These vessels, they probably were, because these were vessels which were being used by the Egyptians, by the world to receive for himself alone. Okay, and now they will be brought into holiness. Okay. And eventually be able to use for receiving for the sake of giving. And God gave the grace of the people into the sight of the Egyptians, and they gave them what they asked for, and they despoiled the Egyptians. Okay. Now, one more bit. Oh, we've run out of time anyhow. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, 600,000 men on foot, apart from the children. And also mixed multitude. These, the Zohar says that these were actually many of the advisors of Pharaoh. They had their witches and wizards, or whatever you want to call them, spiritual advisors, not Jewish, the opposite. Okay, these were the ones who eventually were clamoring for the golden calf. Went up with them. Why did they go up with them? Because they recognized, that they were very limited in their spiritual powers, and it was through Moses, through the children of Israel, who had the aspect of giving, that they would be able to actually get more. So that was how they came to make the golden calf eventually. All right, so that wasn't so positive. So now they're baking the dough, which they took out of Egypt, ugot matzot. They managed to keep it as ugot matzot, okay? Mutsot, right, the bread of the poor, the bread of faith, not using their wills to receive. Kilo chametz, okay? They didn't leaven, it didn't leaven, all right? So this is the piece that Rabban Gamliel brings in the Haggadah. Ki goshu mitzrayim, they were driven out of Egypt. They didn't take any of the essence, of their wills to receive, okay? Lo yachlu litmamer, they couldn't tarry. V'gam seder lo asu lahem, and also victuals they did not prepare. Now, what does that mean? I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't believe that Jewish mothers have changed very much in these centuries. They knew they were leaving, at least they had to have faith from what Moses had told them 2 weeks in advance. Okay, are you telling me that the children of Israel, their mothers, did not prepare food to go with? I mean, it just to me is inconceivable. All right. I mean, when you've got kids, you're sending them off to school. Have you got your sandwich? Have you forgotten your sandwich? Take your sandwich. All right. So, okay, even if they weren't allowed to take sandwiches, they would have taken something. All right. So it was very clear to me that Seder here does not mean the literal meaning of food. And in fact, when you look in the Zohar, you find that it has a very specific meaning, and it's the Or Chochmah. Okay, it's the great light of the Or Chochmah. It actually found in 2 places in the Torah. One is in relationship to Esau and the blessings, okay? And the other one is with Nimrod. Okay, and both of them is the aspect of trying to grab the Or Chochmah, okay? And this is what they didn't do. They didn't try to grab the light. They went with faith, okay? Faith is not grabbing, faith is giving, okay? So the great light was present, but they went out using faith, using humility, using the matzah, the aspect of the poor, okay? They didn't try to get knowledge, okay, of God or anything like that, okay? That's what that means. And the time that Israel dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Now, according to Rashi, it wasn't as long as that. It was 200 and something, okay? Because he figured it out from the ages of the ages and names of the people who were there, the generations or whatever. So they think that time frame was actually from the time of the Brit Bein HaBetarim to when they went out. Okay. ויהי מקץ 30 שנה ו400 שנה בעצם היום הזה יצאו כל צבאות השם מארץ מצרים. And it was on the end of the 430 years, and it was on that very self-same day that all the hosts of God came out from the land of Egypt. Leil Shmuim hu l'Hashem l'otzia me'eretz Mitzrayim. It is the night of watching for God. And again, Hashem. All right, so here's God making this judgment against the Egyptians, but it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. It's compassion for the soul, compassion for the children of Israel. So when we think about this, we really want to think about our wills to receive for ourselves alone as being the Egyptian aspect, and the Eretz Yisrael, the Yisrael, the soul within us, is what's being freed. Okay. והלילה הזה לשם שימורים לכל בני ישראל לדורותם. Okay? And it is, on this night, it is a guarding for all the children of Israel for their generation. Now, here's the bit. Okay? ויאמר השם אל משה, God said to Moses ואהרון, זאת חוקת הפסח, כל בן נכר לא יאכל בו. This is the law of the Pesach. No a foreigner can eat of it. Kol eved ish miknet kesef umaltoto. as yochal bo. Even the servants that you bought for money has to be circumcised. Then he can eat from it. All right? So that was the reason why they did Brit Milah, before they could eat the Korban Pesach. Okay, they couldn't eat the Korban Pesach without Brit Milah. And again, this Brit Milah has the function of removing the will to receive for itself alone. So they did Brit Milah, they did Korban Pesach, and they entered into the framework of holiness. And then from then on until Shavuot, we have to build the framework of holiness. Okay? Wow. Okay. I think that's more. Well, we haven't quite finished, but I think we did enough. Yes. Okay, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Wonderful.
Yedidah,
Yes.
did Moses was given all the instructions by God for all of this, and Moses gave the instructions to the people?
That's right.
Okay, it's
That's
incredible. It's just I assume that was Moses the one who was really aware that it was all about changing their attitude from desire to receive from the self to desire to give.
Definitely.
Because
Definitely. I don't have any doubt about that. The Rav Ashlag teaches us absolutely that the Zohar is part of the Torah Shebaal Peh, and the Torah Shebaal Peh was given to Moses at the same time as the Torah Shebichtav. For sure he understood.
But he's the only one.
Well,
right? The people were just all acting on faith in him.
I think you're probably right, but I don't know. They're called Dor Deah. They
Yeah.
were an extraordinary generation. I mean, we don't understand the greatness of that generation that came out of Egypt. We don't understand how great they really were. They're an amazing, amazing, amazing
Elevated souls.
Very, 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 very much so. We don't understand how great they really were. I mean, you know, they went through so many trials during their sojourn in the wilderness.
Right.
And you think to yourself, well, why did they do that? Why did they say that? But we don't understand at all how great they really were. Rav Ashlag says, Rav Gottlieb says, we can't grasp how great they were. They were the generation who were chosen to stand at Mount Sinai and see and receive the voice of God. They were the ones who saw the hand of God in Egypt. They saw all the plagues. When they came out of Egypt, they were the ones who walked through the Red Sea and the sea parted for them. We don't understand how great this generation really was.
No, obviously not. Obviously not. So we don't really know how aware they were, how spiritually aware they were. But
well, I don't know. You know, things go in opposites, you know. When you fall down so low, that's when you also get a lot of light coming in a funny sort of way. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Extremes.
It's an extreme. You on the one hand, they were extreme. They fell down very low. On the other hand, they had that tremendous potential.
Obviously.
Yeah.
What a trip to be on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Very, very, very good. Listen, my dears, next week, I don't know where we are as regarding Pesach, but I'll put a note on the WhatsApp if we're going to do one or not. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So I have to see how things are as far as my cleaning goes.
Yeah, it's time to really start now.
It is. I mean, I've done some. Thank God, but I've still got a lot to do, and it depends, how we're doing. But I'm glad
Okay.
we had this session at least. Anyhow, I'll see how we do for next week. Okay, if I'm okay and I've managed to get forwards, then I'll put a note on the WhatsApp and we can do one. Okay.
Yes, thank you
Okay,
so
thank you.
much.
All right. Take care.
Okay, thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
All right. Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Chodesh Tov. Chodesh
Kodesh
Tov.
Tov.
Bye.
Bye.